My best man married my fiancée. While I was in a car crash, I woke up replaced. The wedding invitation came to my hospital room on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by a nurse who thought she was doing something nice. Cream-colored cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of expensive stationery Rachel and I had looked at together 6 months earlier when we were planning our own wedding. I remember the exact moment I opened it, sitting in that uncomfortable hospital bed with my left leg still in a cast, my ribs still taped up, my head still fuzzing from the pain medication they had me on. The names on the invitation made my hands shake so badly, I dropped it on the floor. Mr. Garrett Sullivan and Miss Rachel Catherine Delacroix request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. My best friend, my fiancée, getting married, in 3 days, and I was apparently invited to watch them do it. The nurse saw my face and asked if I was okay, if I needed more medication, if she should call the doctor. I couldn't answer. I just kept staring at that invitation on the linoleum floor, at those 2 names printed together like they belonged that way, like the past 8 years of my life with Rachel had just been erased and rewritten with Garrett as the male lead instead of me. I'd been in the hospital for 11 weeks, recovering from a car accident that should have killed me. 11 weeks of surgeries and physical therapy and slow, agonizing healing. And apparently during those 11 weeks, while I was unconscious, and then barely conscious, and then fighting to relearn how to walk, my best friend had stolen my entire life. My name is Cameron Blake, and I need to tell you how I ended up here, lying in a hospital bed holding an invitation to the wedding that was supposed to be mine. But first, you need to understand who these people were to me before everything shattered. Rachel Delacroix was the love of my life. I met her 7 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party in Seattle. She was a graphic designer, creative and vibrant, with this infectious laugh that made everyone around her smile. I was a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company, analytical and quiet, the exact opposite of her in almost every way. But somehow we fit together perfectly. She brought color and spontaneity to my structured world. I gave her stability and someone who actually listened when she talked about her work. We moved in together after a year, got a dog together after 2 years, started talking about marriage after 3. I proposed on our 5th anniversary at the same restaurant where we'd had our first date, a little Italian place in Capitol Hill that we'd been going to regularly ever since. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. We set the wedding date for September 28th. We had 9 months to plan everything. We were going to get married at a vineyard in Woodinville, have the reception in the barrel room, invite about 150 people, keep it elegant, but not too formal. Rachel had already picked out her dress. I'd already chosen my best man. Garrett Sullivan had been my best friend since college. We met freshman year at University of Washington, both computer science majors, both from small towns outside Seattle, both trying to figure out how to navigate the big city and the challenging coursework. We became roommates sophomore year and stayed close even after graduation. When I started dating Rachel, Garrett was one of the first people I introduced her to. When I got the job at Tech Core Solutions, Garrett helped me negotiate my salary. When I bought my first house, Garrett helped me move in. We had the kind of friendship people write movies about, the kind where you trust someone completely because they've proven themselves over and over for more than a decade. Garrett was charming in a way I never was. He could walk into any room and become the center of attention within minutes. He had this easy confidence, this natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. He worked in sales at a different tech company, and he was phenomenal at it, consistently the top performer on his team. He dated casually, but never seemed interested in anything serious. Always said he was waiting to find someone as perfect as Rachel was for me. I took it as a compliment. I thought it meant he respected our relationship, that he saw what Rachel and I had as something special worth aspiring to. I was so stupidly naive. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The accident happened on July 9th of last year, a Wednesday evening around 7:15 p.m. I remember the exact time because I'd just left work and texted Rachel that I was heading home and would pick up dinner on the way. She responded with a heart emoji and a request for Thai food from our favorite place. I never made it to the restaurant. I was driving south on I-5, traffic was moderately heavy but moving, and I was in the middle lane doing about 60 miles per hour. A delivery van 2 lanes over swerved suddenly to avoid something, overcorrected, and slammed into the concrete barrier. The impact sent the van spinning across 3 lanes of traffic directly into my path. I had maybe 2 seconds to react. I remember seeing it coming, remember yanking the wheel to the right, remember the horrible sound of metal crushing metal, and then nothing. Complete darkness. According to the police report I read later, my car was hit on the driver's side by the van, and then struck from behind by 2 other vehicles whose drivers couldn't stop in time. My Toyota Camry was completely totaled, compressed to about half its original length on the driver's side. The first responders said it was a miracle I survived at all. I had a fractured skull, 3 broken ribs, a shattered left femur, a ruptured spleen, internal bleeding, and severe trauma to my spine. I was rushed to Harborview Medical Center in critical condition. I was in surgery for 8 hours that first night as trauma surgeons worked to stabilize me and stop the internal bleeding. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks while my brain swelling went down and my body started to heal from the most critical injuries. When they finally brought me out of the coma, I spent another week in a fog of confusion and pain, barely able to process what had happened or where I was. My memories from that time are fragmented and unreliable, flashes of bright lights and voices I couldn't quite understand, people talking to me without me being able to respond. Rachel was there. I remember that. I remember her face hovering over me, remember her holding my hand, remember her voice telling me I was going to be okay. Garrett was there too, or at least I think he was. I have vague impressions of his presence, of conversations happening around me that I couldn't quite follow. The doctors told me later that I had visitors every day during those first few weeks, that Rachel and Garrett rarely left the hospital, that they were constantly checking on me and asking for updates on my condition. It should have been comforting to know I had people who cared that much. Instead, now it makes me sick to think about what they were probably actually doing during all that time they spent together in my hospital room while I was unconscious. By week 4, I was conscious and coherent enough to have actual conversations, though I was still on heavy pain medication and sleeping 16 to 18 hours a day. The doctors explained my injuries in detail, walked me through the recovery timeline, told me I was looking at months of physical therapy and rehabilitation before I'd be anywhere close to normal. My left leg was the biggest concern. The femur had been shattered in multiple places and required surgical reconstruction with pins and plates. I wouldn't be able to put weight on it for at least 8 weeks, and even after that, I'd need intensive therapy to regain full mobility. They were optimistic I'd make a complete recovery eventually, but it was going to be a long, difficult process. Rachel visited every day during this period. She'd come after work, stay until visiting hours ended at 9 p.m., bring me things from home to make the hospital room feel less sterile, books I liked, photos of us together, my favorite snacks once I was allowed to eat solid food again. She seemed attentive, loving, concerned, exactly how you'd expect someone's fiancé to behave when they've been in a terrible accident. But there were small things, tiny details that my medicated brain registered but didn't quite process at the time. She'd check her phone constantly during visits, smiling at messages she wouldn't share with me. She'd cut visits short sometimes, claiming she had work emergencies or needed to take care of things at the house. She seemed distracted, like part of her mind was always somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to my bed. Garrett visited too, though less frequently than Rachel. He'd come by once or twice a week, usually on weekends, and we'd talk about work and sports and random stuff, anything to distract me from the reality of my situation. He seemed supportive, encouraging, like the good friend I'd always known him to be, but I noticed he and Rachel never visited at the same time. They'd coordinate their schedules carefully to avoid overlapping. At the time, I assumed they were being considerate, making sure I had company spread throughout the week rather than everyone coming at once. I didn't question it. I didn't question any of it, because questioning would have meant acknowledging that something felt wrong, and I wasn't ready to do that. I was too focused on healing, too dependent on the people around me, too vulnerable to start doubting the only support system I had. Week 6 was when things started to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. Rachel's visits became shorter and less frequent. She'd show up for 30 minutes instead of staying the full visiting hours. She'd be on her phone even more, sometimes taking calls out in the hallway and coming back flustered and distracted. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd say work was crazy, or she was stressed about managing the house alone, or she was tired from all the hospital visits. All reasonable explanations, all delivered with just enough edge in her voice that I didn't push further. One evening during week 7, I asked her about the wedding. We were less than 2 months away from our planned date, and we hadn't talked about it at all since the accident. Rachel, what do we do about September 28th? I asked. Do we postpone? I don't think I'll be out of here by then, and even if I am, I'll still be in physical therapy. She looked uncomfortable, shifted in her chair, didn't meet my eyes. We should probably postpone, yeah. I can start making calls, letting people know. There was something flat in her voice, something wrong that I couldn't identify. Are you okay with that? I asked. I know how much you were looking forward to this. She finally looked at me, and her expression was strange, sad, but also something else I couldn't read. Cameron, I just want you to focus on getting better. The wedding can wait. We have time. But the way she said it made it sound like she wasn't sure we did have time, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. She left early that night, said she wasn't feeling well and needed to go home and rest. I watched her walk out of the room and felt this cold pit forming in my stomach, this sense that something fundamental was shifting beneath me, and I couldn't stop it. Week 8 was when Garrett's behavior changed too. He started visiting more frequently, sometimes showing up multiple times a week, always carefully timed when Rachel wasn't there. We'd talk, but the conversations felt forced, like he was checking off a box on a to-do list rather than actually connecting with me. I noticed he looked different too. He'd lost weight, looked more put together than usual, was dressing better. When I commented on it, he laughed it off, said he'd started working out more and taking better care of himself. Almost dying puts things in perspective, he said, gesturing at me. Makes you realize you need to appreciate life while you have it. It seemed like a normal thing to say. It was only later that I realized how loaded that statement actually was. During one of his visits in week 9, I asked him if he'd seen Rachel lately, if she seemed okay to him. He tensed up immediately, this visible stiffness in his shoulders. I've run into her a few times, he said carefully. She seems stressed. This has been hard on everyone. The way he said it made it sound like he was defending her, like I was being unreasonable for expecting my fiancée to handle my near-death experience better. I let it drop, but the seed of doubt was planted. Something was happening that I wasn't seeing, something that everyone else knew about except me. I started paying closer attention after that, watching Rachel and Garrett more carefully during their visits, looking for clues I'd missed. I noticed Rachel had stopped wearing her engagement ring. When I asked about it, she said she'd taken it off while doing dishes and forgot to put it back on, that it was safely at home. But she never wore it during any subsequent visit either. I noticed Garrett had a new phone background, a photo of a sunset that looked like it was taken at the beach. When I commented that it was nice, he quickly changed the subject. I noticed they both seemed uncomfortable when I talked about the future, about what we'd do once I was recovered, about plans for the postponed wedding, or trips we'd talked about taking. They'd give vague responses, change the topic, or suddenly remember they needed to leave. Individually, these were all small things, easily explained. Together, they formed a pattern that my medication-fogged brain was finally starting to recognize. By week 10, I was doing much better physically. The doctors were pleased with my progress. I was starting to put weight on my leg with assistance, doing physical therapy twice a day, regaining strength and mobility faster than they'd expected. I was also reducing my pain medication, which meant my mind was clearer than it had been in over 2 months. And with that clarity came the unavoidable realization that Rachel was pulling away from me. She visited only twice that week. Both visits were brief, awkward, filled with long silences and forced small talk. She wouldn't hold my hand anymore, wouldn't kiss me goodbye, wouldn't talk about anything meaningful or future-focused. On her second visit that week, I finally confronted her directly. "Rachel, what's going on with us?" I asked. She looked startled, almost guilty. "What do you mean? You're distant. You barely visit anymore. When you do visit, you act like you can't wait to leave. Something's wrong, and I need you to tell me what it is." She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Cameron, this has been really hard. The accident, the recovery, seeing you like this, it's been traumatic for me too." I felt anger flare up, hot and immediate. "I'm the one who almost died, Rachel. I'm the one lying in a hospital bed with a metal rod in my leg and months of recovery ahead. Don't talk to me about how hard this is for you." She looked up, and there were tears in her eyes, but also frustration. "That's exactly what I mean. Everything is about your pain, your recovery, your trauma. I'm trying to be supportive, but I'm drowning too, and you don't even see it. We'd never fought like this before. Even as I was angry, part of me knew I should stop, should apologize, should try to understand her perspective. But the other part of me, the part that had been noticing all the small wrong things for weeks, pushed forward. If this is too much for you, if you can't handle supporting me through this, then maybe you should just say so." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and terrible. Rachel stood up, grabbed her purse, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Resigned, relieved, like I'd just given her permission for something she'd been waiting to do. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe I should go." She walked out without looking back. I didn't hear from her for 4 days after that. No visits, no calls, no texts. I tried reaching out several times, but my messages went unanswered. I told myself she was hurt and needed space, that we'd work through this once emotions settled, that couples fought, and this was just a bad moment in a terrible situation. I didn't let myself think about what her silence might actually mean. Garrett visited once during those 4 days. It was a Saturday afternoon, week 11, and he seemed agitated, uncomfortable, like there was something he wanted to say, but couldn't figure out how to start. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes, surface-level conversation that went nowhere, and then he abruptly stood up and said he had to leave. "Garrett, wait," I said. "Have you talked to Rachel? She hasn't been here in days, and she's not responding to my messages." He froze halfway to the door, his back to me. "I've seen her," he said without turning around. "She's dealing with a lot right now." "What does that mean? Is she okay? What's going on?" He turned to face me, and the look on his face was pure guilt, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. Fear, maybe, or determination. "Cameron, I can't have this conversation for her. You need to talk to Rachel." And then he left too, practically fleeing from the room. That was when I knew for certain that something catastrophic was coming. I just had no idea what form it would take. Rachel finally came back on Monday of week 11, and she brought someone with her. A woman I'd never seen before, late 30s, professionally dressed, carrying a leather portfolio. She introduced herself as Amanda Kellerman, a family therapist specializing in trauma and relationship counseling. "I asked Amanda to join us today because I think we need help having this conversation," Rachel said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. We sat there in my hospital room, me in the bed, Rachel in the chair beside it, Amanda Kellerman positioned slightly between us like a referee, and Rachel told me she was leaving me. Not because of the accident, she claimed. Not because I was injured or because things were hard, but because she'd realized during my recovery that she wasn't in love with me anymore, that she hadn't been for a while, that the accident had just made her confront feelings she'd been avoiding for months. It was all very clinical, very therapeutic, very carefully worded to minimize her guilt and make it sound like she was doing the healthy, honest thing by ending our relationship while I was still bedridden and dependent. Amanda Kellerman nodded along, like this was all very reasonable. Like breaking up with your fiancé while he was recovering from life-threatening injuries was a valid form of self-care. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. This woman I'd loved for 7 years, who I'd built a life with, who I'd planned to marry in less than 2 months, was calmly explaining that she didn't want me anymore, while a therapist took notes on her clipboard. I know the timing is terrible, Rachel continued, still using that careful, therapeutic voice. But Amanda helped me understand that staying in a relationship I'm not committed to would be more harmful in the long run, for both of us. I found my voice finally, though it came out rough and broken. Is there someone else? Rachel hesitated just a fraction of a second too long. No, this is about us, about realizing we want different things. But I'd seen that hesitation. I'd heard the lie underneath her words. There was someone else. And based on all the pieces I'd been unconsciously collecting for weeks, I was starting to have a terrible suspicion about who that someone might be. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. Rachel left that day with Amanda Kellerman, leaving me alone in my hospital room with my shattered leg and my shattered life, and I didn't see her again for 3 weeks. But I did see Garrett. He showed up the next day, looking like he hadn't slept, and started apologizing before he even fully entered the room. Cameron, I'm so sorry about Rachel. I know this must be devastating. If there's anything I can do, I cut him off. Are you sleeping with her? His face went pale. What? No, Cameron, why would you even ask that? I stared at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written all over his guilty expression. You're lying. You and Rachel. That's why you've been acting so weird. Why she stopped coming to visit. Why you've been avoiding each other during visits. You've been together this whole time, haven't you? Garrett backed toward the door. You're on pain medication. You're not thinking clearly. Rachel and I are not together. But he couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. Get out, I said. Get the hell out of my room and don't come back. He left. And like Rachel, he didn't come back. Not for weeks. I spent the next 3 weeks in a spiral of anger and grief and disbelief, trying to process everything that had happened while still doing my physical therapy and recovering from injuries that had nearly killed me. The nurses could see something was wrong beyond my physical trauma, and they were kind about it, giving me space when I needed it, checking on me more frequently when I seemed particularly low. My doctor, Dr. Patricia Thornton, a woman in her mid-50s who'd been overseeing my care since the accident, sat down with me during week 13 to have what she called a holistic conversation about recovery. Mr. Blake, your physical healing is progressing well, she said, but I'm concerned about your emotional state. Trauma recovery isn't just about fixing broken bones. It's about processing the psychological impact of what happened to you. I appreciated that she didn't immediately jump to prescribing antidepressants or suggesting therapy. She just acknowledged that what I was going through was genuinely awful and that it was okay to be struggling. My fiancée left me while I was in here recovering, I said bluntly, and I think she's with my best friend now. So yeah, I'm struggling. Doctor. Thornton nodded sympathetically. I'm very sorry. That's a profound betrayal on top of already significant trauma. Have you been able to talk to anyone about this? Family? Friends? A therapist? I shook my head. My parents are on the East Coast. I haven't told them any of this because I don't want them to worry. And my friends? I don't know who to trust anymore. Garrett was my closest friend. If he could do this, who else might? She made some notes in my chart. I'm going to refer you to our hospital's mental health services. There's a counselor, Dr. James Oakley, who specializes in helping patients process trauma and betrayal. I think talking to him might help you navigate this situation more effectively. I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. Dr. James Oakley turned out to be exactly what I needed. He was in his early 40s, calm and analytical, and he didn't try to sugarcoat the reality of my situation. You've experienced multiple traumas in a very short period, he said during our first session. The accident, the near-death experience, the physical injuries, the betrayal by your fiancé and best friend, the loss of your support system while you're at your most vulnerable. Any one of these would be significant. All of them together creates a compounding effect that can be overwhelming. He helped me understand that my anger was valid, that my grief was normal, that I wasn't crazy for feeling like my entire world had collapsed. But he also pushed me to think about what came next. You can't control what Rachel and Garrett did, he said, but you can control how you respond. What do you want your life to look like when you leave this hospital? Who do you want to be on the other side of this betrayal? Those questions kept me focused through the hardest weeks of my recovery. I threw myself into physical therapy with renewed determination. I practiced walking with crutches for hours every day. I did every exercise the therapists gave me, pushed through the pain, focused on getting strong enough to leave the hospital and start rebuilding my life. I was discharged from Harborview on September 15th, 11 weeks and 6 days after the accident. My original wedding date was September 28th, less than 2 weeks away. I moved back into the house I'd shared with Rachel, though she'd already cleared out her belongings while I was hospitalized. The space felt hollow, like a museum of a life that didn't exist anymore. Her closet was empty. Her toiletries were gone from the bathroom. The photos of us together had been removed from the walls, leaving lighter squares on the paint where they'd hung. Our dog, a golden retriever named Cooper that we'd adopted together 3 years earlier, was also gone. According to a note Rachel had left on the kitchen counter, she'd taken him to stay with her parents because she didn't think I'd be able to care for him while recovering. The note was clinical, practical, completely devoid of emotion or any acknowledgement of what we'd been to each other. I spent my first night home alone, sitting on the couch with my crutches leaning against the armrest, staring at the empty spaces where my life used to be. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. Real answers. Not the sanitized, therapeutic explanations Rachel had given me in the hospital. I needed to know the truth about what had happened while I was fighting for my life. I started with Rachel's best friend, a woman named Stephanie Liu, who I'd known almost as long as I'd known Rachel. Stephanie and I had always been friendly, and I hoped she might be willing to talk to me honestly. I called her, and she agreed to meet me for coffee that afternoon at a place near her apartment in Fremont. When I arrived on my crutches, moving slowly and carefully, Stephanie looked genuinely upset to see me. She hugged me carefully, avoiding my injured side, and her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Cameron, I'm so sorry about everything," she said as we sat down. "I wanted to visit you in the hospital, but Rachel asked me not to, and I thought I should respect that since you guys were going through something." I felt that cold anger again, carefully controlled. "Rachel asked you not to visit me? Why?" Stephanie looked uncomfortable. "She said you needed space to focus on recovery without a lot of people around. She said it was too overwhelming for you to have visitors beyond your immediate support system." I laughed, a bitter sound. "My immediate support system? You mean her and Garrett? The two people who were apparently hooking up while I was unconscious?" Stephanie's face confirmed what I'd suspected. She knew. She'd known the whole time. "Stephanie, I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "All of it. When did Rachel and Garrett get together? How long has this been going on?" She was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with loyalty to Rachel versus what she thought was right. Finally, she sighed. "It started about 3 weeks after your accident. Rachel was devastated, spending all her time at the hospital, not sleeping, not eating. Garrett was there too, supporting both of you, and I think they just bonded over the shared trauma of almost losing you." I felt sick. 3 weeks. I was in a medically induced coma, and they started hooking up 3 weeks later. Stephanie held up her hands. "It wasn't like that at first. At least that's what Rachel told me. They were just friends, supporting each other. But by week 5 or 6, it had turned into something more. She felt terrible about it, Cameron. She knew it was wrong, but she also said she'd never felt this kind of connection with anyone. That Garrett understood her in ways you never had." The words hit like physical blows. "She told you that? That Garrett understood her better than I did?" Stephanie looked miserable. She was confused and emotional. I think she was trying to justify what she was doing to herself as much as to me. I told her she needed to end it, that she needed to talk to you, but she said she couldn't deal with that conversation while you were still in the hospital, still so vulnerable. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to stay calm, to keep gathering information. "Did everyone know? All our friends?" Stephanie shook her head. "No. Rachel kept it very quiet. Just me and maybe 1 or 2 other people. She didn't want it getting back to you while you were recovering. She was planning to tell you after you got out of the hospital, I think. She just didn't know how." I thought about the breakup conversation with the therapist in the hospital room. "She did tell me. She brought a therapist to help her dump me while I was still bedridden." Stephanie winced. "I know. She told me about that. She thought having a professional there would help keep things civil, would help you process it better. Civil. Like there was a civil way to destroy someone's life." I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Stephanie, are Rachel and Garrett together now? Like, officially?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, they moved in together about 2 weeks ago. Rachel's been staying at his apartment since she moved out of your place, 2 weeks ago, while I was still in the hospital, while I was still learning to walk again, while I was still believing that maybe, somehow, Rachel and I might find a way to work through this. They'd already moved in together. They'd already committed to each other in the way Rachel and I had committed years ago." I thanked Stephanie for her honesty and left the coffee shop feeling numb. When I got home, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I opened Facebook, something I hadn't looked at in months, and searched for Rachel's profile. It was still set to public, and what I saw there made everything infinitely worse. Photos of Rachel and Garrett together, smiling, happy, looking like a couple who'd been together for years rather than weeks. Pictures from restaurants I'd taken Rachel to, hikes we'd done together, the beach where I'd proposed to her, now featuring Garrett instead of me in the sunset photos. And in the comments, friends congratulating them, saying how happy they looked, how perfect they were together. Some of these people had been invited to our wedding. Some of them knew what had happened to me, and they were celebrating Rachel and Garrett's relationship like it was a beautiful love story instead of a betrayal built on someone else's tragedy. I scrolled further back and found something that made my blood run cold. A photo posted on August 3rd, tagged at a restaurant in downtown Seattle. Rachel and Garrett at a candlelit table, holding hands across the table, looking into each other's eyes. The caption, Sometimes the right person shows up when you least expect it. The date, August 3rd. That was week 4 of my hospitalization. I was barely conscious at that point, still heavily medicated, still fighting infections, and they were already going on dates, already holding hands in public, already posting about their relationship on social media. I grabbed my phone and called Garrett. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice cautious. Cameron? August 3rd, I said. You and Rachel were posting photos together on August 3rd. I'd been out of the coma for what, a week? I could barely speak in full sentences, and you were already taking her on dates? Silence on the other end. Then, Cameron, it's more complicated than it looks. We were both in a really emotional place, and I cut him off. You were my best man, Garrett. You were supposed to be the person standing next to me at my wedding in 2 weeks. Instead, you started dating my fiancée while I was in a hospital bed fighting to survive. More silence. Then, quieter. I never meant for any of this to happen, but I can't help how I feel. I fell in love with her, Cameron. I fell in love with Rachel, and she feels the same way about me. I'm sorry that it hurts you, but I can't apologize for finding something real. I'd never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. Something real. You found something real with my fiancé while I was in a coma. Do you even hear yourself? His voice got defensive. You act like we planned this, like we wanted this to happen. We didn't, but Rachel deserves to be happy. And if that's with me instead of you, then that's just how things worked out. I was shaking with rage. How things worked out. My best friend and my fiancé betraying me while I was fighting for my life is just how things worked out. Garrett sighed, sounding tired. I'm trying to be understanding about your anger, Cameron. You went through something traumatic, but Rachel and I are together now, and you need to accept that and move on. I hung up on him before I said something I'd regret. I sat there in my empty house, my leg throbbing, my head pounding, my entire body shaking with fury and grief and disbelief. And then I got the wedding invitation. 3 days later, Thursday afternoon, delivered by a hospital nurse who'd kept it after my discharge to forward to my home address. Mr. Garrett Sullivan and Ms. Rachel Catherine Delacroix requested the honor of my presence at their wedding ceremony on September 28th at 4 p.m. at a vineyard in Woodinville. Our venue, our date, our wedding, with their names on it instead. I called my lawyer. I didn't have a family lawyer or anyone I'd worked with before, so I went through my company's legal benefit program and got connected with someone named David Faulkner, a middle-aged attorney who specialized in property disputes and relationship law. I met with him the next day at his office in Bellevue. I brought everything: the wedding invitation, screenshots from social media, the timeline of events, medical records showing when I was conscious versus unconscious, everything I could think of that documented what had happened. David listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and whistled low. This is one of the most brazen betrayals I've encountered in my career, and I've seen a lot, he said. Your fiancé and best friend started a relationship while you were incapacitated, moved in together, and are now getting married on your original wedding date at your original venue. I nodded. Can I do anything about it? Legally, I mean? Can I stop the wedding or sue them or something? David considered this. Unfortunately, you can't stop the wedding. Freedom to marry who you choose is constitutionally protected. As morally reprehensible as their behavior is, it's not illegal. My heart sank. But, he continued, there are a few things we can potentially pursue. First, did you and Rachel own any property together? The house you're living in, for example? I explained that the house was in my name only, bought before Rachel and I got engaged, but that she'd contributed to some improvements and utilities over the years. She might try to claim she has an interest in the property based on those contributions, David said, especially in a state like Washington with palimony considerations. We should document everything related to the house to protect your ownership. We talked about other shared assets, the dog she'd taken, joint bank accounts we'd had that she'd already closed out, taking half the money, a car we'd purchased together 2 years ago that was in both our names but that she'd taken when she moved out. David made notes on all of it. This is going to sound calculating, he said, but given the timing and circumstances, we might also want to consider whether their relationship had started before the accident. If we can establish that they were involved or planning to get involved before your injury, that changes the narrative significantly. I hadn't even thought of that possibility, but once he said it, it made terrible sense. The ease with which they'd gotten together, how quickly they'd moved from supporting each other to dating, the fact that Garrett had always been a little too interested in Rachel, always complimented her a little too much, always found reasons to be around her. How would we prove something like that? I asked. David thought for a moment. Social media history, text messages if you can access them, witness statements from people who might have noticed something before the accident. It's a long shot, but if there's any evidence of a pre-existing emotional affair or relationship, it would be valuable. I left David's office with a plan. Document everything. Protect my assets. Look for any evidence that might show this betrayal started before the accident. And most importantly, stop letting them control the narrative. I started reaching out to friends, people who'd been part of our social circle, asking them what they'd observed, what they knew. Most people were uncomfortable talking about it, caught between loyalty to me and not wanting to get involved in drama, but a few were willing to share what they'd noticed. One friend, a guy named Marcus, wait, I can't use Marcus. Let me call him Derek. No, Derek is forbidden too. Let me call him Nathan Wright, who I'd known since college, met me for drinks, and told me something that changed everything. Cameron, I didn't want to say anything while you were still in the hospital, Nathan said, but Garrett and Rachel were definitely closer than they should have been before your accident. I noticed it at your engagement party last year. The way they interacted, the inside jokes, the fact that they spent half the party talking to each other instead of circulating. It seemed off. I felt cold. My engagement party, that was almost a year ago. Nathan nodded. I don't know if anything physical happened before the accident, but emotionally, they were already connected in a way that felt inappropriate for your fiancé and your best man. I asked if he'd be willing to give a formal statement about what he'd observed. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. If it helps you get some justice, yeah, I'll document what I saw. Over the next week, I collected 3 more witness statements from people who'd noticed concerning behavior between Rachel and Garrett before my accident. None of them had proof of physical affair, but all of them described an emotional closeness that went beyond normal friendship. I also did something that felt invasive, but necessary. I accessed the phone records from my cell phone account. Rachel had been on my family plan, and while I couldn't see the content of her messages, I could see the numbers she'd been texting and calling. The pattern was obvious and damning. Starting 6 months before my accident, the number she communicated with most frequently after me was Garrett's. Hundreds of texts per month, calls lasting 30, 45, 60 minutes, late-night calls that happened after I'd gone to bed. The frequency had increased dramatically in the month before my accident, with some days showing 50 or more texts between them. And then after the accident, the communications had become almost constant. They were texting each other more than Rachel was texting me when I was in the hospital. I took all of this to David Faulkner. He reviewed the evidence and smiled grimly. This is good. This establishes a pattern of inappropriate relationship that predated your injury. Combined with the witness statements, we can build a timeline that shows this wasn't just 2 people finding comfort during a tragedy. This was an affair that was already developing. What do we do with this information? I asked. David leaned back in his chair. That depends on what you want to accomplish. If you want to pursue financial claims related to shared assets, this evidence supports that Rachel's decision to end your relationship was influenced by a pre-existing emotional affair, which could affect how certain assets are divided. If you want to expose their behavior publicly, this provides documentation. If you just want validation that you're not crazy for feeling betrayed, well, you have that in abundance. I thought about the wedding invitation. Rachel and Garrett getting married on what should have been my wedding day. I want them to face consequences, I said. I want everyone to know what they did. David raised an eyebrow. Be careful with that impulse. Public exposure can feel satisfying, but it can also backfire. You need to think about what you actually want to achieve. I went home and thought about it for 2 days. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? For Rachel and Garrett to hurt the way I was hurting? For everyone who'd congratulated them on social media to know the truth? Or did I just want to move forward with my life, cut them out completely, and focus on healing? On September 26th, 2 days before the wedding, I made my decision. I wasn't going to stop their wedding or make a scene, but I was going to make sure the truth was known, and I was going to do it in a way that was documented and undeniable. I created a detailed timeline of everything that had happened, complete with screenshots, medical records, witness statements, and phone records. I wrote a clear, factual account of how my fiancé and best man had started an emotional affair before my accident, developed it into a physical relationship while I was hospitalized, and were now getting married on my original wedding date at my original venue. I didn't editorialize. I didn't make it dramatic. I just laid out the facts in chronological order with supporting evidence. And then I posted it to Facebook, tagging every person who'd been invited to my original wedding, every person who'd commented on Rachel and Garrett's relationship photos, every mutual friend who deserved to know what they were actually celebrating. The response was immediate and explosive. Within an hour, I had hundreds of comments. People expressing shock, outrage, support, people apologizing for congratulating Rachel and Garrett without knowing the full story, people who'd attended my engagement party saying they'd noticed strange behavior too, but hadn't said anything. Rachel's friends trying to defend her, saying I was bitter and vindictive, that relationships end and people move on, that I had no right to air private matters publicly. Garrett's colleagues from work expressing disappointment and surprise, and then radio silence from Rachel and Garrett themselves. No response, no denial, no explanation. Their social media accounts went dark. The wedding was still scheduled to happen in 2 days, but now everyone invited would be showing up knowing the truth about how the relationship started. I'd exposed them, not with drama or confrontation, but with simple, documented facts, and it felt like the first real victory I'd had since waking up in that hospital bed. The night before the wedding, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cameron? It's Veronica Delacroix, Rachel's mother. I'd always liked Veronica. She was kind, thoughtful, had welcomed me into their family without reservation. Mrs. Delacroix, I'm surprised to hear from you. Her voice was strained, upset. Cameron, I need you to know that I had no idea. About the timeline. About when Rachel and Garrett's relationship started. She told us they got together after she'd ended things with you, that it was a gradual development after your recovery. She never mentioned that it started while you were still in the hospital. I felt a small surge of vindication. She lied to you too. Yes, and I'm horrified. When I saw your post, when I saw the evidence you compiled, I called Rachel immediately and confronted her. She admitted that she'd misrepresented the timeline to me and her father. She said she was afraid we'd judge her if we knew the truth. Veronica took a shaky breath. Cameron, I want to apologize for not seeing this sooner, for not questioning their story more carefully. You were almost killed. You were fighting for your life, and my daughter was starting a relationship with your best friend. There's no version of that that's acceptable. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for telling me. I won't be attending the wedding tomorrow, Veronica continued. I told Rachel that I can't support a marriage that was built on betrayal and deception. Her father feels the same way. We love our daughter, but we can't condone what she's done. After I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. Not quite peace, but something close to it. The truth was out. People knew. The narrative that Rachel and Garrett had carefully constructed of two people finding unexpected love during a tragedy was destroyed. Everyone now knew they'd betrayed someone who was fighting for his life. I didn't go to the wedding. I spent September 28th, the day that was supposed to be my wedding day, at physical therapy. I worked with my therapist, a woman named Linda Cho, who'd been helping me rebuild strength in my leg, and I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. I walked a full mile without crutches for the first time since the accident. I went home exhausted, physically and emotionally, and slept better than I had in weeks. Over the next few months, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to work part-time in October, full-time by November. My company had been supportive throughout my recovery, holding my position and letting me return gradually as I was able. I sold the house that Rachel and I had shared. Too many memories, too much pain. I found a smaller place closer to downtown, a condo with no history, no ghosts. I adopted a dog from a local rescue, a scruffy terrier mix named Sam, who'd also been through trauma and was learning to trust again. We were good for each other. I continued therapy with Dr. Oakley, processing the betrayal, working through the anger, slowly learning to trust people again. It was hard. Some days were harder than others, but I was healing. I heard through mutual friends that Rachel and Garrett's marriage was already having problems. The foundation of betrayal and deception that it was built on turned out to be unstable. They were fighting constantly, apparently. Several people who'd remained friends with them said Garrett was jealous of Rachel's ex-boyfriends, paranoid that she'd leave him the way she'd left me. Rachel was reportedly having second thoughts about the marriage, questioning whether what they'd felt during the intense emotion of my hospitalization was actually love or just guilt and adrenaline. I didn't take pleasure in their problems. I'd moved past the point where I wanted them to suffer. I just wanted them to be irrelevant to my life. In January of this year, 7 months after the accident, I met someone. Her name was Olivia Park. She was a physical therapist, though not mine, who I met at a charity run I was participating in as part of my recovery goals. We started talking at the registration table, discovered we both loved hiking and terrible sci-fi movies, and exchanged numbers. Our first date was careful, tentative. I was upfront about what I'd been through, about the accident and the betrayal. I didn't want to hide anything or start something new on false pretenses. Olivia listened to my story and then shared her own. She'd been in a serious relationship that ended badly 3 years ago when her boyfriend had cheated on her with her coworker. I understand betrayal, she said simply. I understand how it changes you, makes you cautious. But I also believe that most people are good, that what happened to us doesn't have to define what happens next. We took it slow, really slow. But gradually, over months, I started to trust again, started to believe that not everyone would betray me, that I could open myself up to someone new without being destroyed. Last month, Olivia and I went on a camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula. We were sitting by the campfire on our second night, and she asked me if I'd truly moved past what Rachel and Garrett had done. I thought about it carefully. I don't think you ever completely move past a betrayal like that, I said. It changes you, makes you more careful, more aware of people's capacity to hurt you. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm not consumed by it. I'm just living my life, and they're not part of it. Olivia nodded. That's healthy. That's growth. She was right. I had grown. Not just physically, recovering from injuries that had nearly killed me, but emotionally and psychologically. I'd learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could survive betrayal and loss and still find reasons to trust again, to love again, to build again. 3 weeks ago, I got a message from Garrett on LinkedIn. Professional platform, neutral territory. I guess he thought that made it okay. Cameron, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been in therapy, working on myself, and my therapist encouraged me to reach out and apologize. What I did was wrong. I betrayed your trust at your most vulnerable moment. I justified it to myself at the time, convinced myself it was somehow okay, but I know now that it wasn't. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I hope you're doing well. I read it twice. I thought about all the different ways I could respond. I could tell him off, list all the ways his apology was inadequate, explain how much damage he'd actually caused. I could accept his apology, offer forgiveness, try to find some closure, Or I could do what I actually did, delete the message without responding and block him on every platform I could find. Because the truth is, I don't owe Garrett or Rachel anything. Not my anger, not my forgiveness, not my acknowledgement. They made their choices, they faced consequences, and now I'm making my own choices, building my own life, free from their influence. I'm sitting in my condo right now, Sam asleep at my feet, getting ready to meet Olivia for dinner. My leg barely hurts anymore. The scars are fading, both the physical and the emotional ones. I'm not the same person I was before the accident. I'm more careful, more aware, more appreciative of the people who stayed, who supported me, who didn't betray me when it would have been easy to do so. If you're going through something similar, if someone you trusted destroyed that trust in your most vulnerable moment, I want you to know, you will survive this. It won't be easy. Some days will be harder than you think you can handle, but you're stronger than you know, and you deserve better than people who would betray you when you need them most. Document everything. Protect yourself. Tell the truth. And then, when you're ready, move forward. Build something new. Find people who deserve your trust. Live your life in a way that proves their betrayal didn't destroy you. That's my story. That's how I woke up replaced and rebuilt anyway. And honestly, I'm better now than I was before. Not because of what they did to me, but because of what I did with it. I survived. I exposed the truth. I healed. And I'm still here, still building, still believing that good people exist, and that trust is worth the risk. That's the real victory. Not revenge or perfect justice, just surviving and choosing to trust again anyway. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.